Welcome, everybody. What a great turnout tonight. Thank you for coming to the Norwich Bookstore. My name is Emma Cuss. I'm one of the co-owners. So before we get started, I just ask that everyone turn off your cell phones, store your musical instruments, silence those pagers, so that we can all enjoy tonight's conversation. Tonight, we are delighted to host Helen Whybrow for her memoir, The Salt Stones, a profoundly moving meditation on the lessons learned raising a family, tending sheep, and living close to the land. Truly, it is a love letter to Vermont. Helen is also the author of A Man Apart and the editor of 4 anthologies. She has taught writing at Middlebury College and Breadloaf Environmental Writers Conference, among others. And tonight, in conversation with Helen, is local reader and friend of the store, Dawn Carey. Dawn and Helen were in a book club together, but this is the first time they're seeing each other in decades. So you know it's going to be a good conversation. Please put your hands together for Helen and Dawn.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I was here for a reading of my first book about 20 years ago. So great memories of this beautiful little piece of heaven in Vermont. And my father also did a reading here. So I grew up in the Upper Valley in Plainfield. So I feel like I'm right at home. It's really nice to be back. And of course, amazing to see Dawn, who I literally have not seen in 25 years or more. So yeah, so this is a special evening. I thought I would begin just with a very short reading to tell you a little bit about the origins of the book and the inspiration for the book. I've been a shepherd for 25 years. I have a sheep farm in Fayston, Vermont, which is one of the steep hill towns in the center of the state near the Mad River Valley. And the origin story of how we ended up there, my husband and I ended up there, is in the book and is probably too long to explain tonight. But essentially I like to say, and it's only partially a joke, that we won the farm in an essay contest. And we ended up there through the Vermont Land Trust. And it's a very, very steep, rocky piece of land. And part of our covenant to the land trust was that we would keep it in agriculture. And sheep seemed like the perfect animals to restore this very worn out hill farm. So sheep arrived there with us in 2001. And for many of those 25 years, I've just been farming, building the farm, raising kids, not writing very much, although I did have a career in writing and publishing before we moved there. So it was something that I always wanted to get back to and I missed and just didn't have time for. And somehow, I'm not even sure how it started, but somehow in the last 5 years, I would say, stories just kept bubbling up and wanting to be written, and I started jotting things down. And about 2 years ago, I really set myself the task of spending the winter writing this book. But I wanted to explain sort of my muse in the book, that my literary muse who really helped me turn my stories into something more is a French author named Jean Giono, who some of you might know for his little novella called The Man Who Planted Trees, which was published by Chelsea Green, and is one of few of his novels that's still in print in English. And there's another he wrote many big fat novels actually, but there's another little novella that he wrote that's now out of print called The Serpent of Stars. And I stumbled upon it in a bookstore. It's about shepherds, just like The Man Who Planted Trees is about a shepherd who reforests a damaged hillside after World War I. And the title of the book, The Salt Stones, comes from a phrase that I read in the book, which I'll just read to you. In the high pastures, the shepherds go find flat rocks and they line them up in the grass. These are the salt stones. Every night the shepherds pour 4 or 5 handfuls of rough gray salt on these flat rocks. It's for the nursing ewe, it's for the trembling young lamb, it's for the good sheep huddled with cold, or the one who has a thorn in its foot. It's a consolation and a remedy. And when I read that, I thought, I knew I wanted to write a book about the land and the restoration of the land, and my deep connection with land, and I wanted it to be a consolation and a remedy. I didn't want it to be another book about everything that we've lost. So I'll just read a little piece about how I came upon this book, and then we'll have a conversation about all sorts of themes that come up in the Saltstones. The Serpent of Stars, originally published in 1933 as Le Serpent d'Étoiles, begins with shepherds, or rather the lack of them. They are missing at the marketplace where the narrator begins the book, and he goes in search of them. He finds one who becomes a gracious, if enigmatic host, traveling across the Malafugas plateau. Much like the character in The Man Who Planted Trees, who is also a shepherd, this host is a paternal figure, knowing things, living in a remote high place, in tune with the land as an extension of his being. But the land is the main character. The wind, the hills, the night are all creaturely, animate, and insistent, both threatening and life-giving. Everything is connected and yet unknowable. Early in the journey, the narrator and shepherds make a meal of grass and night. The night we munched with the salad. The night overflowed from the crater in slow gushes, and our mouths were full of night when we bit into the bread crusts rubbed with garlic. The grass and night, bread and oil mixed in the belly and were breathed out again into the saps and smells of the terrain, quote, so much so that finally we were drunk from the triple power of the sky, the earth, and truth. I read the book in one gulp, sitting in the car in the Tempest parking lot, my baby asleep, my blood on fire. The words cut directly to my longing in the tightly wrapped cocoon, enraptured but also in bondage that comes with birth. I was beholden to a baby and a flock of sheep that was almost in lambing time, to things that needed my body to be present day and night. Giono's words found the ragged nerve endings of new motherhood and began, in ways that I didn't yet understand, to connect the mundane in my life to the mystic. Sometimes it takes a fiction or a dream to fill the place in your heart that you didn't even know was searching. The play made no sense to me at first. I read a page and reread it, trying to make sense of the words. Some things you understand immediately, and others, important things, you understand over time. Like many initiations, this one settled in stealthily, like snow in a dense forest of fir. All I knew at that moment was that I could see myself roaming the mountains with these shepherds, and that image awakened something in me. I was a young mother, a new shepherd, and I had just moved to a 200-acre farm. I didn't yet know what I was doing in this new life. Just a year before, I had had a singular sense of freedom, and now I was responsible for so much life that required me to be bound to one place. This book pulled at my imagination, and in time its depiction of life with a flock of sheep appeared to me as a bridge between my opposing inner worlds of longing for elsewhere and at the same time wanting to belong to something that needed me. The story was also a bridge between words, poetry, and the land, which have always been my two primal loves. Wandering with their flock, these shepherds and their mythic play were full participants in a world as vast and unknowable as the sea. They were utterly part of something larger than they could hold, and they were creating meaning from that mystery. They had immersed. I wanted the same for myself. And so that's in the second chapter, and really the book is about sort of what I've learned by being immersed, not only with my flock of sheep, but with the land and nature and science and history and everything that's wrapped up in one's kinship with place.
That's all.
It all just kind of poured out, and there it is.
So this is when we talk about how I feel like I'm a huge poser sitting up here at all, because I am so in awe of this. I read this book in a seating and a half, basically. So I met you before either one of us had babies. I met you before either one of us were married to who we're married to now. We both had very different lives, and yet there are a lot of the similarities going through, which made me really excited when we reconnected. As some of you know, my youngest child is named Helen, and she's named after many strong Helens. She was one of them. She's definitely this fierce, calm, quiet that I was always in awe of, and I continue to be in awe of. So when I had this opportunity, when we connected again, I first was excited about it because it was you. And then I read the book, and that also made me excited because it was you, and I got to discover 25 years of you through this book. And when you get to read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It is, the word I keep using is delicious. It is so delicious. And I want to talk about some of the themes because, as you said, there's something in there that everyone's going to connect with. So let's talk about motherhood for just a second. You know, just as one to
A
start.
favorite topic.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. That piece about that being tied down and the push-pull of being a mom, of you, it's the thing you love most in the world and you cannot wait to get away from it at the same time. Let's just dig into that and how that connects to farm as well.
Yeah. So my daughter's a really big part of this book. I have an older daughter who's my stepdaughter, who was 3 when we moved to the farm. And then I have a daughter who's 21 now. She's a baby at the beginning of the book, as you just heard, and she is 18 at the end of the book. The book follows one seasonal cycle. It begins in the spring and it ends in the spring, but it really covers 20 years. And part of the way the reader understands time is passing is through Wren growing up. And the other way is my mother, who's losing her memory and her sort of her decline in the course of the book. And so there's sort of these interwoven threads of motherhood, daughterhood, and the farm time. And I think, as you said, Donna, there is this tension between the wanting to stay and caretake and make meaning in a place. And then there's this, at least for me, this kind of hunger to be a nomad and a adventurer and to have a lot of freedom. And so I struggled with that a lot in my life. And I think that one of the beauties of bringing up a child on a farm in a landscape is that you're always moving, you're always doing, and they can be included in that. You don't just sort of disappear to your job and they don't know where you are, and then you reappear and you connect with them. They are integrated with the life. And one of the great challenges, but also great joys, was figuring out how to keep the work going, get all the chores done on the farm, but make it fun for Wren so that she would want to tag along with me. And she did. She became so enmeshed in farm life that she stopped going to school for a couple of years. We sort of homeschooled her at home, but we didn't have a lot of time to, do it in a really serious way. And then she did end up going back to school for high school for social reasons. But I think she grew in a lot of confidence and in those years when she was just really kind of finding her own way and educating herself on the farm. She also did all the art for the book.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, she's very much a self-taught artist, and I gave her the manuscript a couple of years ago when I was getting close to finishing it, or about a year ago, and I said, just draw your emotional response to each chapter. And that's what she did, and we didn't edit them at all. They're in here exactly as she drew them. And then the designer at Milkweed asked her to do the cover, which was really wonderful, except that at the time Wren was in Idaho living in a tent. And I thought, how is this going to work? Because she's in a very different landscape. And so I sent her, and she did, her medium is block woodcuts, as you can see. So I sent her a block and her carving tools and a few photographs of the farm, and FedExed it to her tent in Idaho. And she literally was living in a tent without a car because she'd driven out there to work for Fish and Wildlife for the summer in our old farm truck, which broke down 3 times on the way, and ended up spending the truck spent the entire summer in the wrecker's yard. And Wren found an old bike, and sort of testament to her ingenuity, she biked back and forth from Fish and Wildlife Office to her tent, and she carved this piece. She FedExed it back to me, and I printed it and sent it to the designer, and we got it in just in time. I didn't tell her any of that. I was like, oh, sure. It's just all been so smooth, and no problem. So, yeah, we've had some good adventures, and I'm really proud of her.
Did you do that your whole life with her? Everything's fine.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll read a little piece, actually, if that's okay.
Yeah.
A short piece about Wren growing up and sort of that dance of motherhood, of wanting them to stay and wanting them to leave.
Half of the people in this room are nodding to themselves.
Yes.
Complete understanding.
Yes, it's such a dance that we do as parents. So let me just, sorry, I just don't have it bookmarked, but I will find it. The summer after I find the dead swallows, Wren is 15, and she learns to drive stick shift, delivering blueberries in our old farm truck. Every Wednesday, we break away from our picking and other chores to take flats of blueberries into the valley to stores and restaurants that order our wholesale fruit. We deliver to American Flatbread, the Pitcher Inn, the Warren Store, the East Warren Market, and Tom at the Featherbed, who makes pies. Wren drives the crooked roads, her eyes glued straight in front, her back not touching the seat. While she's getting used to the clutch and shifting gears, the truck does not so much roll as hop down the road like a sheep on a rope, sometimes out of nowhere stalling to a dead stop. Over my shoulder, I nervously watch the tower of cardboard boxes, each filled with pints and quarts of berries, seat buckled into the narrow back seat of the truck cab. Given that we live in the mountains with no traffic lights but plenty of stop signs at the bottom or at the top of steep hills, learning to drive a manual is genuinely terrifying. Right away, Wren got good at rolling to a smooth stop and not stalling at the end of our precipitous road, about a half-mile downhill from the farm. Starting up again while tilted at an angle at the stop sign and doing it quickly to fit into traffic on the main road is another trick. We wait for a while at the stop sign, even though no cars are in sight. I don't say a word. Wren revs the engine to a roar, bravely jams it into first, lifts the clutch, and simultaneously pushes down on the gas, and we leap forward like a horse out of the starting gate, then shudder to a crawl just as suddenly until she finds second gear. My eyes are glued on the back window in case someone rams us from the rear end. You're driving a little erratically, a little slower on the clutch. I think I'm driving really well today. I'm afraid these berries might tip, I say, turning around in my seat with one hand on the boxes brimming with blueberries, and Wren points out that she could really use some help on the traffic rules. Don't hit any old ladies, I tell her as we drive into Warren, usually full of white-haired tourists on beautiful afternoons. Once we get all the berries out of the hot car and safely to their destinations, I suggest we turn south. It's so damn hot, let's go for a swim. Don't you have to get back? Wren asks. Yeah, but you need driving practice. More is always good. Driving together through hills that are fleeced with humidity and shimmering with heat, exhausted as I am from so many straight days of harvesting in the sun, I feel a surge of exhilaration to be wandering together off the farm. All the days have run together, weekday and weekend, a nearly indistinguishable whirl of people coming to the farm to pick berries or stay for a program, staff who live with us needing direction and to-do lists, cooks making meals in the house, and groups gathering to eat them in the top of the barn. Even the sheep have been almost an afterthought in the stew of summer harvest season. Too soon, Wren will go back to school. When Willow moved away to college in the Midwest last year, Wren decided she needed an adventure of her own. We had raised a child who was self-assured and physically fearless, could solve problems with her hands as well as her mind, and could have deep conversations with anyone from any walk of life, but whose learning was entirely unconventional and undisciplined. She returned to public school at 12 to have more time with friends, but she was frustrated by so many long hours indoors without much to show for it. She wanted, quote, something rigorous, she said, so to our great surprise, she sought out a private school in Massachusetts. Her first year had been desperately hard. She was full of homesickness and overwhelmed at being so far behind. Most of all, she wasn't in sync with her media-centered generation. So many of the things she loved were of no consequence to anyone. She couldn't find people to mess around in the woods or swim in the river in the rain, and she felt terribly lonely. The place felt confining, demanding, and too far away to come home for weekends. More than once, Peter and I had driven 3 hours to have dinner with her and cheer her up, then driven 3 hours home. With summer nearly over, I'm filled with the sense of needing more time with her, and she with me. Even though she worked on the farm, I was busy from dawn to dark and never took a day off. Except for these driving lessons, I barely left the hillside. An image, Wren at 4 crying and saying, "I know you're here, Mom, but I can never find you." That was just yesterday, it seems. How has the river carried me so far, so fast? Soon my baby will have her license. I want desperately to stop time. Barry Lopez was once asked to give advice to a 15-year-old girl who wanted to be a writer. His answer, read a lot. Find out what you truly believe in. Get out of town. Leave the familiar. That seems like good advice for every parent to give every teenager, I thought when I read his words. But it also shatters me. Like me at her age, and much longer, until I was well into my 20s, Wren struggles to leave home. A huge emptiness wells up, a sense of pure panic. I have heard it in her voice over the phone. I have felt it in my own chest, and know I must help her to overcome it, even as I have also helped her to attach to this piece of ground. She will find strength in knowing that she can leave, that she's capable, and that she can return. Me, I'm trying to remember that letting go of something is not the same as losing it. Wren cues up our favorite song on the truck audio, and I crank it up. No one on my shoulder bringing me fears. Got no clouds up above bringing me tears. Patty Griffin's strong but vulnerable voice fills the car. Got nothing to tell you. I've got nothing much to say. Only I'm glad to be with you on this heavenly, heavenly, heavenly day. We follow the winding road south out of Warren and drive through a heavily forested, steep section called the Granville Gulf, hot wind buffeting through the windows. The road narrows, and all along it are rock ledges covered in moss and streaked with water that comes from dark, shaded hills high above. The air cools. Even in summer, there's the smell of snow. We turn off the pavement onto a dirt Forest Service road. A creek tumbles down through a steep valley and over sculpted granite, the water glinting green and silver below the roots of trees. We pull over, kick off our shoes, and scramble down the vertical shelf from the road to the gorge, hanging on to maple saplings and digging our bare heels into the dark forest duff. We peel off our clothes and slip our tired, berry-stained, sweat-stung bodies into the achingly cold water in the broken forest light. The river flows over us and beyond, holding us afloat, this moment, this, a word like an outstretched hand. And I should say that Wren did find her confidence, and the following year, after she graduated from high school, she rode her bike solo from our driveway to Alaska.
Wow.
So she is quite a badass. And yeah, that's a whole nother story. That's not in the book, but that was a hard one to let her go on that adventure for sure.
What I love about this and throughout the book, it almost feels like, if you take it from the Wren-centered realm, it feels almost like, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or Pee-wee's Playhouse, where you have all these characters coming in to be with her or to be with you. And that's a major element in this that I found you kept coming back to, these people who are either practicing some of these older artisanal crafts. We call them artisanal now when they're just actually the way things were done, right? And you talk about maybe not wanting to do it anymore if those people are gone. I want to talk about that a little bit because they helped you raise her as well. That's the beauty of this. It feels like here. It really feels like here. I mean, I'm looking here, and there are people here in here who are responsible for helping me raise my children. So,
right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that feeling of it takes a village, and what do you do as that village composition is changing in different ways. And
yeah, the larger context of our farm is that it's also a gathering place for activists working in social justice and environmental justice worlds. A lot of nonprofits come and do trainings and board meetings there. A lot of people stay overnight, and we can house them and feed them. And then we have a lot of staff and young people living with us. And then we have this rich community of the valley itself, of the especially dear to my heart, the people who've been farming for generations there. And those are also the types of people I grew up with in Plainfield. Just when Plainfield down the river here was very much a farming community, and I grew up there in the 70s and 80s and watching the dairy farms, slowly die out. And so I feel a reverence for that knowledge, that old knowledge, and those attitudes and that way of life. And I am very close to, the person who, we don't make all of our own hay because our land's too steep. So I buy hay from this wonderful guy named Hal Saunders, who's an incredible storyteller, lives over in Lincoln, Vermont. And I always tell him, like, if you stop making hay, I'm going to stop keeping sheep, because because it's just like, to make hay with him and deliver it to our barn and to spend time with him is such a rich part of my summer. So, and I know you all know the feeling, and these small Vermont towns are so rich in that sense of community, and we're really lucky that way. It's a privilege and a blessing that we have here, I think, that not all parts of the country have.
Love that. One other element that is new to me that I didn't really think of, other people may be practicing this already here. There's an element of the barter system that is at a very high level in the story and seemingly in your life. And I realize I don't have part of that. I might bring somebody a pie because they need a pie, sort of thing, but it's not the way I walk this earth. Tell me a little bit about that.
About the barter.
Yes,
Yeah.
I loved that.
I love the barter system. I feel like I take any opportunity to barter with people. So I've bartered sheep for, like, live animals for people who wanted to raise sheep, for cords of wood, for frozen chickens, for raspberry plants, for so many different things that, I was looking for at that time, and it seemed like a great exchange, or somebody was hard up for cash, but they had cordwood. So, and I feel like that was a big part of my childhood as well. And we talk a lot about the gift economy, which is partly about your habit of taking people pies, which is so beautiful. And I think it's wonderful when you start to notice the gift economy, which operates on a whole nother subversive level outside of the regular economy. And I think it's really what brings a lot of meaning to our lives. So I really try to make that a big part of my life whenever possible. I mean, we do farm for a living, and we have to be somewhat disciplined about it, and it comes with certain disciplines and rigor that where we have to make money on something, but we try to hold that pretty loosely, and try to have a good, healthy sense of what's enough, and beyond enough, what do you really need,
You and I started talking about this a little bit, that throughout the book there are elements that talk about sense of scale, that in the United States, if 1 is good, 10 is great, sort of thing, that, how am I going to scale up this successful thing, whatever it is? And are we at the end stage of that sort of piece? And even the discussion about the types of sheep that you raise versus the meaning in that. And I want to talk a little bit about the global effect of some of these things. And that to me was a really compelling conversation. We started talking about this end stage capitalism elements, and is this sustainable?
Yeah. Thank you for elevating that sort of broader context. I think that as a small farmer, and I imagine there are farmers here in this room, you're very aware of being pressured to scale up or not being taken seriously as a small farmer, or funding channels. Everything's kind of, small farmers tend to be left out of the farm bill, left out of funding channels, left out of a lot of things. And so it's like even more of a struggle than it is already, because of the way that America prioritizes bigness and efficiency. I write a lot in the book about our relationship with the animals we raise. Pastoralism is really ancient. That's sort of the relationship to ruminants, goats and sheep in particular, but also cows, is predates agriculture. It's like 13,000 years old. And for most of those, probably for 12,800 of those years, it was not about commodity or profit or efficiency or industrialization or just making food. It was about relationship. It was about social currency. It was about kinship. It was about your standing in the community. It was about your fuel, your fiber. It was like, and pastoralists around the world still have this very complex relationship with their animals. And it's really very recent that we've started seeing animals as kind of units of production that are treated the way that they're treated and slaughtered the way that they're slaughtered. And most people going to the supermarket don't think about that. Like, they think it's normal, but it really hasn't been normal in the span of history. And it's really not sustainable. I mean, agriculture is one of the leading causes of climate change and desertification and water pollution and water scarcity, all these things that I'm sure you know. Agriculture can also be a source of restoration and healing, which is what I've studied in the last 20 years, is how do you raise sheep and work the land in a way that's restoring to the ecosystem. But that's very much a minority approach. And I think for me, the question is always like, how can we do that and do it in a way that supports our family and keeps it going, and maybe, can be more widespread. And there's some hopeful movements in that direction. And certainly if you eat grass-fed meat, if you're a meat eater, but you eat grass-fed meat only, there's some statistical analysis that if we all just ate grass-fed meat from east of the Mississippi where there's water, that the West wouldn't have a water problem. Wow. So it's like there's some very tangible reasons for taking a different approach.
So now there are two different areas I want to go. I want to talk about science, because there's lots of science in there. I also want to go back to this relationship with animals, because the world is filled with coincidences. 2 weekends ago, I'm in New York City and listening to Vermont superstar Anais Mitchell, and she is singing a song that's based on a book that her dad wrote, and it's a sad story about this farmer whose wife tells him to go take care of the farm, to do the things that are his role, and for those of you who know the story, subsequently dies in childbirth. It's a very sad song. And there's this tension in choosing to do what you're doing, where there are these things that are the right things to do. And then there's how am I following my heart? How am I, I have animals as pets right now. I don't raise them. So there's so many tensions in this, that your role versus you as an individual, I'm sure, is in constant chaos or tension. I'm sure you're now 2 decades into it, so I'm sure you've resolved this. Tell me a little bit about that. That part was astounding to me.
Yeah. Does anyone here know that book, The Souls of Lambs?
I just happen to have
beautiful.
a copy
It's out.
of it.
Another incredible book that's out of print, written by Dawn Mitchell, who taught at Middlebury for years, and is a beautiful writer, and Anais' dad. But so I think there's a lot of death when you're farming. There's a lot of accidental death. unintended death. There's a lot of death by your own hand if you're raising animals for meat. And there's definitely a reckoning that has to happen with that as a farmer. I feel like, of sort of like, how do you decide? Someone asked me this the other day. I mean, 2 days ago, I loaded up some sheep and drove them to Benson, Vermont for our summer meet. And someone was visiting the farm and said, how do you decide who goes? You know, I have a lot of sheep and I have to pull out. And, you know, it's a complex, for me, it's a complex answer based on my relationship with the animals and how they were born and their life cycle, and whether I can sell them for breed stock to other people, or whether there's something going on with them that where I couldn't in good conscience sell them. For the most part, raising meat is about, you know, producing a crop of lambs, separating the lambs from their mother, and then they all go to the butcher. And that's not the way I do things at all. I do it in a probably insanely complicated way, but for me, it's the only way I feel capable of doing it, and of kind of being at peace with the beauty of that food that nourishes us, but in a way that it has some like how of my heart in it. It's not just a kind of heartless decision. So it's definitely complicated, and I think that I don't know if that answers your question. I think I sense that you're also asking it on a larger scale too, of sort of as a farmer and being so rooted in these cyclical, seasonal, very physical modes of work, and they don't really allow you to do much else. And there is a sacrifice in that. And I think it's not for everyone. Like, I mean, I definitely get a lot of people started with small flocks of sheep, and they have a great dream about it, and it lasts a couple years, and then they call me and say, where can I sell these sheep? Will you take them back? You know, it's really not for everyone at all.
Well,
yeah.
Let's talk about that part.
Yeah.
I mean, we get to travel with you in this story throughout the book, and the two of you are starry-eyed at the beginning with these aspirations. After 2 years, you didn't give up the sheep. But what did you give up? What have you been fiercely holding on to ever since then? And what did you say, no, that was romanticized, we're not doing that, or whatever those things look like?
Yeah, I think it's amazing how much it's held to. When we first arrived there, we said we were going to grow high bush blueberries and raise sheep, and we have about 100 sheep and a couple of acres of high bush blueberries. There were definitely times when we felt the pressure to make it a lot bigger, and did have a much bigger farm. We had a CSA for a while. I realized I was not a vegetable farmer. I did not want to be thinning carrots and washing beets and all those things on top of the other things that I do. I'm a very physically restless person, so there's something about, like, I move our sheep flock every 3 days on the land, so there's something about like that walking and being in the field and being in the woods and being with sheep in the field. You are with nature. You're not, it's very different than being on a cultivated row of beets, say. For me, it's just much more attuned to my nature. I gave up a lot of my professional life. I mean, I made more money in my 20s than I've made since, like combined, I think. I gave up, I sacrificed a lot of career aspirations to be there, and in the literary world and writing and publishing and things like that. So in some ways, this book is a sort of promise that I kept to myself, that I wouldn't completely abandon that and maybe someday get back to it. So that's been a really nice part of doing the book. Yeah, it's bringing those worlds together.
Love that.
Yeah.
I have 100 questions, by the way. Should we take questions from them as well? We can kind of go back and forth. I realize this is supposed to be a conversation, but the two of us could just be sitting somewhere chatting. Thank you for being here and listening.
Yeah,
It's very nice of you.
Take some
Yeah.
questions.
Does anybody have any questions? You haven't read the book yet, so this is I assume, actually. I shouldn't say. You've read the book already? Is that what you're going to tell us?
Well, I was going to say that I'm halfway through, so I'm clearly not as fast a reader as you are.
Well, maybe next book, Paul.
So maybe the question is answered towards the tail end of the book, but I'm curious about the future of the farm from your perspective, particularly given the way you came into the farm and how that might pass on into the future.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The question is the future of our farm. What do we think about the future of the farm? Our daughters are maybe a little young to be able to step up and say whether or not they would want to take on the farm in their own way. But we're also very aware that it's getting harder to make a small farm work. I mean, the Mad River Valley has become a very expensive place, and property taxes are very high now, and we would love for it is conserved by the Vermont Land Trust. We would love for it to always be a farm. We have no intention of selling it on the open market because we know it probably would become a second home. So our hope is to pass it on to young farmers and do something very similar to what Ann Day, who you've now read about if you've read half the book, who lived there for 50 years before us, and her gift of the farm to the Vermont Land Trust made it possible for us to afford to live there. And we want to continue passing on that gift, to speak of, the gift economy that's really important to us. So we're starting to think about how to do that. Before we're crippled, we want to figure that out. So yeah, hopefully we have a little time.
I think probably do. What are some of the pieces that, taxes notwithstanding, what are some of the pieces that would need to be in place for not just Knoll Farm to continue, but for this to spread? We're very lucky that we live in Vermont and there are people who come here with that in mind, right? But the goal would be that there's a broader spread. What are we as a country or as a globe missing out on right now, that, in a hopeful way? I mean, there's many negative things that we're missing out on, but
in terms of farming,
or even attachment to land. A lot of this is talking about the transhumanism. Is that how you say it? I've read it 100 times. I realize I've never said it. The idea of following with the animals over the land, and we all have examples of that in our understanding of the world, but it seems like a very special set aside thing. Is that something we should move more back towards, or what does that look like as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very complex question, right? I think that it depends, like how we farm depends so much on the landscape we inhabit and how much water we have and how our villages are laid out and what kind of infrastructure we have. And we're lucky in Vermont that, and it's really, really changed since I was a child. I mean, I grew up on a farm as a kid, and it was not a sexy thing to do, believe me. I mean, it was like you were embarrassed to be a farm kid back then, and farms were really rough places and weren't highly respected like they are now. There weren't the same farmers markets and small shops selling local food and people who wanted to buy local food. And, so I think that the movement here has been very hopeful. It's a really sort of bright light in the farming world. And I think that it's definitely happening other places as well. That sort of growth of the infrastructure that supports small, more sustainable farms. I do think on the larger landscape, grass-fed meat and moving animals, there's a ton of science on this, and I won't go into it tonight, but there's a lot of science around moving animals as if they were wild ruminants moving across a landscape where they're eating grass very rapidly and they're not returning to eat it again for several weeks, much as the great herds would move across the Serengeti, and then in another season they would move back across and they fertilize it, they trample it, they make little pockets with their feet where the rain comes in. They're co-evolved with that landscape in a way that supports both the herds and the landscape. The Great Plains and the buffalo were the same. And in our zeal to own land and fence it and claim it, we did great damage to much of the landscape in America by overgrazing it. So that is there's Alan Savory and a lot of other people have really studied like how to reverse desertification through a different type of grazing, and I'm really fascinated by that. I think that is some science on a larger scale that can really make a difference. And so spent some time out west sort of looking at how that's happening in more brittle landscapes. I mean, it's easy to grow grass here, but it's not easy in a lot of America. So, yeah. Are there any other questions? I know we certainly have time for some. Yeah.
Sure, I'll ask one. So my name's Brendan Classen. I live just down the road. We acquired 2 Shetland lambs 12 months ago. So we're bringing sheep farming back to the town. There's at least half a dozen people in town who are doing similar enterprises.
Amazing.
So I have 2 questions. Part of the drive for me to get sheep was an acknowledgement of the history of sheep raising in Vermont, which goes back probably 2 centuries. When there were maybe 5 or 6 million sheep in the state.
1.6 million sheep in Vermont, I think is the number, yeah.
1.6 million.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what is your view of the 2 centuries old legacy of sheep raising in the state? And the second question is, as a writer, and you mentioned reading is a very important vehicle for a writer to advance their trade. What are the books that have perhaps influenced you over the years to get you where you are as a writer?
Oh, thank you. So the question was, first of all, the history of sheep in Vermont. I grew up learning about the merino sheep in Vermont, as most of us Vermonters have. And when I was writing this book, I started digging into it a lot more and reading a lot of primary sources on about what it was like to keep sheep in the colonies, what it was like during merino fever. One of my burning questions was, if there were 1.6 million sheep in 1830 or 1840, and then by 1860 there were almost none, like what happened to them all? So I did a lot of reading. I learned so much fascinating history that is kind of left out, that's really about sheep were very much seen as a form of nation building, because America didn't have any wool, and Britain had a hold on all the wool and cloth and had slapped huge tariffs on it. And so the colonists literally during the Revolutionary War didn't have coats or blankets, because this was way before cotton. The fabric they were trying to make was very coarse homespun from these very small flocks of sheep in the colonies that had not done well. And so bringing the merino was seen by Jefferson and Richardson and others as a way of claiming independence for America. And of course it fell apart because it was a classic economic bubble, and they did a lot of damage to the landscape by the mid 1800s. And then farms were abandoned in Vermont. People went west for, they got sick of all the rocks and the hills and wanted to farm somewhere a little easier. Plus New Zealand and Australia started shipping wool. So it all fell apart, but it was, really fascinating. It built a lot of wealth in a lot of towns in Vermont that you drive around. You see the big old mansions. They were all built on wool, the wool economy. So that was really fascinating. And as far as a reader, I'm a very much a polyamorous reader. I will read 4 books at a time, and I'll have a list of 10 more that I want to read. And I'm mostly read nonfiction, I think, but I love novels as well. I love old stuff. I love new stuff. In terms of what I've learned about writing, I think I'm really influenced by Barry Lopez, Annie Dillard, a lot of the kind of classic Peter Matheson, nature writers. I was an editor for Orion for many years, so I was lucky enough to know some of those people and work with them as an editor. Richard Nelson, The Island Within, is one of my absolute favorite books. I just love to read, and I love to research things. sometimes I'll read stuff that, a lot of times I'll read stuff that's no longer in print. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for this, it's great. Question about your farm in Plainfield, what happened to that? And sounded like it was a lot of hard work, but yet you chose to be a farmer as well. And what was your parents' advice towards you being a farmer?
Yeah, so our farm in Plainfield was a small dairy, and it was next door to Dana and Dennis Meadows, who most of you probably have heard of, and the Limits to Growth. And Dana taught at Dartmouth for a long time, and they were neighbors. I lived there since I was 5. My parents are English and moved to the U.S. when I was 2, and they had come from a rural lifestyle, and they really wanted to raise animals. But we weren't farmers for our living. My father was actually the dean of the Dartmouth Med School, and my mom was a social worker. And I remember vividly when I was about 8, and my sister and we lived in a dairy town. Like, all our neighbors and all our friends at school were dairy farmers. So we wanted dairy cows, of course. Why not? Like, we wanted to join the fun. And our parents said, you can get some cows if you promise we never have to go to the barn. So my sister and I grew up doing all the chores, all the milking. We sold our raw milk. We sold butter and cheese at the farmer's market, like fresh cheese. And we were just really into it. And it's still in my family. My sister lives there now. She's a vet. So yeah, it's still in the Whybrow family. And it's not as intensively farmed anymore, but the land is still there. It's beautiful. Yeah.
So you had more of a calling for farming than your parents maybe.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it started very innocently as a kid wanting to do. It's like, instead of wanting the next toy that everyone had, we wanted the cow because that's what everyone had. So I think that's just started that innocently, honestly. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, on the way back.
I know you and Peter both wrote books about Bill Copperthwaite. I think it's kind of the limelight in the Facebook. I was wondering how he might have influenced your life.
Amazing. Yeah, so that was a question about a man named Bill Copperthwaite, who, in addition to Dana Meadows, was one of my great mentors in my life. He was a homesteader and a social critic, designer. He built beautiful wooden yurts, multi-storied circular homes by hand. Lived on the coast of Maine. And my husband and I wrote a book about him called A Man Apart. It was published by Chelsea Green. And it's really about his influence on our lives. He was just an incredible human who his whole life, the way he designed his life was really in protest of kind of business as usual and capitalism. And he was influenced a lot by Helen and Scott Nearing, who wrote Living the Good Life. So he's in that lineage of sort of back to the land. And that's been really influential on us as well, just in terms of like that idea of what's enough and voluntary simplicity and kind of respect for the greater world. Yeah, respect for community. So, and that book is still around if you want to check it out. It may be here, I don't know. It's called A Man Apart, and it's got Peter's, my husband's a photographer as well, so it's got his beautiful photographs in it of this really extraordinary homestead up in Maine. There's so much more we could talk about. If there are any other questions, I think we could take one more. Yeah.
I haven't read your book yet, and I am really excited about the reviews and thrilled. But I just wondered if you had any kind of opinion on goats.
On goats. Oh my gosh. Of course I have an opinion on goats. Yeah, I think they are cuter than sheep, potentially, and much more troublesome in every way. I mean, I think they're so curious and social, and they're really notoriously hard to fence, which is a big reason we didn't get them, and harder to herd. So they're just really different. It's really different to work with them, and I maybe I'd fall in love with them if I had a herd of goats. I probably would, but I decided to make it a little easier on myself and get sheep instead.
You could have a little herd, just a little baby herd over on the side.
I do have a close friend who has a huge, she calls it a flurd, a flock of sheep and a herd of goats. A huge flurd in California that she uses for fire mitigation. They clear brush in areas around Los Angeles that are susceptible to fire. And her flurd gets along great. She has sheep and goats there together. Sometimes it's trouble, but usually it works out. So maybe I'll do that in the future.
And you have a llama.
We don't anymore, but we have had llamas
yes.
over the years as guard animals too. There's a whole chapter in here on all of the trouble we've had with coyotes and how we dealt with coyotes, and a llama was part of the answer to that problem. Yeah.
Pretty great.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, are there ways that you see your lineage of farming from your parents and into your life flowing through the younger generation and your daughter?
With my daughter, yeah. I mean, she works on the farm now. She loves it. But she's studying to be a wildlife biologist at the moment. I think she's even more restless than I am. So I think she wants to explore the world, and she wants to be in nature all the time, but I think she wants to be in lots of different places. So that's the direction she's headed for sure. We'll see what happens. We're not putting any pressure on her to farm, that's for sure. Yeah.
What's beautiful, at least from the book, is that the family is not just your children. You have all of these young people who are coming as interns or coming to work with you, and you're spreading it that way as well. So the lineage is not only through blood at this point, which is kind of great.
That's so true. Yeah, that's so true. I have a whole group of women in their 30s and 40s that I call my sister daughters, and they're like just always at the farm and coming and going and being part of it, and that's a really important piece to me as well. Maybe one of them will take over the farm and give it to one of them, or three of them, or who knows. Something will emerge. Yeah.
Did you happen to hear or see the farm project in her stage?
No.
Production there. I was just wondering how that seemed to you. It was very interesting.
Oh, I
Very
bet.
great.
I'm sorry I missed that. Yeah. Another example of not getting off the farm enough.
Well, you were living it, so that would be the other difference. It was based on this series of interviews that they did with farmers and people involved with farms around the state.
Oh, wow.
As a musical.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Kind
Amazing.
of astounding. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the discussion. Yes. And a lot of the elements that you've been talking about, yes, the legacy, but also the sovereignty elements of it and how we connect to that and who's part of your story. And really, the book was a lovely attachment to the play itself.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, in the back.
I haven't yet read your book, but I look forward to it, and maybe this question is answered in your book, so forgive me if it is. I'm wondering whether you have experience with working dogs on your farm, and can you talk about that if you have?
Yes, thank you. I have one working dog who's retired now, who was really good with the sheep when she was young, but I did realize that I was not well enough trained as a working dog worker to make her really good. There's such an art to it. I really admire people who who have highly trained working dogs, and I've been around a lot of those folks. We got another pup, another shepherd, as she sort of started to age, and he was wonderful at first, but spent a lot of time in the paddock with the ewes and the lambs when he was a pup. And Icelandics they're considered a wild or primitive breed. They're very, very defensive of their young. In Iceland, they generally lamb on their own up in the mountains, and they do exist there as semi-wild animals. So they were constantly just tossing him aside and butting him, and the Icelandic ewes all have horns. And so he just decided this was not his jam at all. He was like, I'm not going near those sheep. So it's very hard to coax him out to the paddock. So that was another one of my failures of like, I should have foreseen that, but I did not. So yeah, not a big success story with me and working dogs for sure. Yeah.
Yet.
Maybe someday. Yeah, maybe someday I'll do that. I do really admire it. Pretty phenomenal. Yeah, but I'm the working sheepdog right now. Like that's what I do. Yeah, keeps me fit, running around. Well, if there are no more questions, maybe I'll just end with a very short reading if people aren't feeling too restless. So I realized that I haven't read anything about sheep yet, which is kind of a problem. So maybe I'll read a little section from the end, toward the end, which is about spring and kind of the essence of the lambing time. I have called Peter out to the barn to help me with the ewe in labor. She's been straining all evening and making little progress. Tony, a small silver ewe, is a first-time mother, wild with fear, her head hanging and sides heaving. Her fleece, wet from the rain, steams with her heat. Rain slaps on the metal shed roof and puddles in the trampled straw and muck by the open doorway. The other ewes, lambs nestled against them, lie all around us, chewing their cuds, billows of breath rising, their warm, wet bodies wafting lanolin's waxy smell. I get into the pen and kneel down beside Tony, and Peter leans over the barricade to hold her head still. I take my time, keep all my movements slow and deliberate. I look over at Peter and know he has noticed what I notice at the same moment, the sound of the first wood frogs singing in the pond. A tentative voice, then silence. A few voices answer in the night, croak, then quiet. Then again with a few more notes, like a thin, ragged heartbeat gaining strength. Wild things rejoining and rejoicing in the liquid season of spring. As we work together in the dark, quiet, concentrating, I am by Tony's tail, coaxing her lamb into position in the birth canal, and Peter is at her head, stroking one velvet cheek and whispering. We begin to notice other things. A plop, plop, a quick movement at the edge of sight. A moist and shiny thing tangled in the ewe's fleece like a jellyfish marooned in grass. An alien eye. A warbler yellow throat, membrane thin, pulsing with a watery song. They are among us, these small, slimy, amphibious gods who are the breakers of winter. We mark their arrival each year on the calendar like a birthday, marking another cycle of the earth. Their song, which grows in strength until it pulsates in the night air, ecstatic and electric, marks our final release and the lands from the tension and deprivation of winter. I have pulled the lamb's legs around into the ready position to be born. Peter and I let the ewe rest in her labor for a time, and we try to catch all the frogs we can find, flopping them into the water bucket where several frogs have already fallen on their blind migratory urge from forest to pond. They are hopping over the sheep's backs, struggling like wet-suited surfers in deep sand through the damp wool. Some of the frogs, having gotten through the sheep obstacle course, bump against the wooden boards at the back of the shed, their urgent trajectory inadvertently blocked by the barn's border wall. The smallest frogs, the spring peepers, are the size of our pinky fingers and impossible to scoop up. The wood frogs are the size of small bats, with sticky webbed toes like miniature wings. There are dozens of frogs in the sheep shed with us, if not hundreds. I am reminded, as I often am, how nature is invisible to us until we start to notice, and how this noticing is both a source of wonder and undoing, of transcendence and grief. It's a kind of noticing akin to falling in love or having a child, when you begin to fully see all the fantastic, alien, mind-blowing, beautiful, and generous creatures and formations of nature. You feel as if you will come apart with joy and also with fear of losing this thing that you can now feel sleeping on your chest, breathing in your face, and wrapping its fingers trustingly around yours. This is how it's been, at least for me. A few minutes later, the young ewe is licking her newborn lamb, drunk on its long, flimsy legs, falling and getting up again and again, determined to find milk within minutes of birth. Peter and I pick up 2 buckets of frogs and head out into the night. We tip the roiling buckets of life into the inky dark at the edge of the pond, which has suddenly gone quiet, sensing our presence. The frogs slip away, joining others, whispering their lines for the full-throated chorus about to come as we leave them to their ritual and head home to bed. Thank you.
Please join me in thanking. Thank you for sharing.